On a quiet Sunday afternoon in Tracy, California, nothing felt unusual. Children rode bikes between trailers. Dogs barked lazily in fenced yards. The late sun cast long shadows across the narrow streets of the Orchard Estates mobile home park. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, where kids wandered freely, and where doors were rarely locked before dark. 8-year-old Sandra Canta loved it there. She had the kind of energy that made adults smile. Always running, always laughing, always knocking on doors asking if someone could come outside and play. Her small frame darted between homes like she owned the park. Everyone knew her. Everyone adored her. And on that day, someone captured what would become the last known footage of her alive. A home security camera showed Sandra walking past a trailer, carefree, swinging her arms. She disappeared off frame. Minutes later, she was gone. At first, no one panicked. Sandra had a habit of drifting from one friend's house to another. If she wasn't home for dinner, her mother would simply walk the park calling her name. That afternoon was no different, until the calling turned into searching. And the searching turned into fear. By early evening, Sandra's mother was knocking on doors with rising desperation in her voice. "Have you seen Sandra?" Most neighbors hadn't. But one of them had. Just a few trailers down lived 28-year-old Melissa Huckabee, a Sunday school teacher and mother of a 5-year-old girl who was close friends with Sandra. Melissa was known in the community. She volunteered at church. She spoke softly. She seemed helpful, attentive, gentle. And she told investigators she had seen Sandra that day. According to Melissa, Sandra had come to her door after school asking if her daughter could play. Melissa said she told her no. She claimed she saw Sandra walking down the steps and assumed she went back outside to find someone else. It sounded normal. Ordinary. But by nightfall, Sandra was still missing. Police were called. Officers canvassed the trailer park with flashlights. Volunteers combed nearby streets. Helicopters circled overhead. The park that once echoed with children's laughter now buzzed with sirens and dread. The first night passed without answers. Then came the call that changed everything. A man walking near an irrigation canal at the edge of town spotted something partially hidden in the brush, a black suitcase. It looked discarded, abandoned. But when officers arrived and unzipped it, the nightmare became real. Inside was Sandra. The news spread through Tracy like wildfire. The small city was stunned, horrified. 8 years old, stuffed inside luggage, left near water. Who could do something like that? Detectives began retracing her final hours. They needed to know who saw her last, who spoke to her, who had opportunity. One name quickly resurfaced, Melissa Huckabee. Not because she was suspicious, at least not yet, but because her daughter had been one of Sandra's closest friends. And Melissa had admitted Sandra stopped by her trailer that afternoon. Officers brought her in for an interview. Melissa arrived voluntarily. Cooperative. She told them something else that caught their attention. A suitcase had been stolen from her car that same day. She said she realized it was missing after she arrived at church. She claimed she called her grandmother and asked her to check outside the trailer to see if it was still there. It wasn't. Neither was it inside the house. Melissa explained that thefts had been happening around the park. Tools disappearing, items taken from sheds. Reporting a stolen suitcase didn't seem unusual in that context. But timing is everything. Sandra had vanished that afternoon. And now Sandra had been found inside a suitcase. Detectives decided to show Melissa a photograph. 2 pieces of luggage lay on the table, one black, one similar in style. "Do either of these look familiar?" they asked. Melissa leaned forward. "I have that one," she said, pointing to the black suitcase. The same suitcase Sandra had been found in. She confirmed it was hers. She tried to recall when she bought it. Clearance sale. Possibly purchased separately from matching pieces. She couldn't quite remember. Investigators asked if anyone had found it since she reported it missing. No. Had anyone in the park mentioned seeing it? No. She maintained that it had simply been stolen. There was no direct evidence tying her to Sandra's death. Not yet. And so, after the interview, Melissa was allowed to leave. That night, the community gathered for a vigil. Candles flickered in the dark. Children clutched stuffed animals. Grown adults wept openly. The air was thick with disbelief and grief. Melissa was there too. At some point during the vigil, she approached a police officer. She said she had found something on the sidewalk, a note. According to Melissa, she saw a small piece of paper on the ground. At first she kicked it aside. Then she noticed a name written on it. Sandra's last name. She picked it up. The note, she claimed, mentioned a suitcase. It referenced water. It listed cross streets. She ran it to police immediately. There was just one problem. Authorities had not publicly disclosed that Sandra had been found inside a suitcase. That detail had not been released to the community. So how would a random note reference it? Detectives felt a chill creep in. The same woman whose suitcase was used to dispose of Sandra's body had now found a note describing exactly how Sandra had been discarded. Coincidence? Or something else? Melissa said she left the note where she found it because she didn't want to contaminate fingerprints. She claimed she was hysterical when she read it. Hyperventilating. Devastated. But the lead detective couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Too many strange overlaps. Too many perfect coincidences. The stolen suitcase. The found note. The undisclosed details. The woman who happened to be at the center of all of it. The next morning, detectives asked Melissa to come back in. This time the conversation would go deeper. And before long, the polite Sunday school teacher would begin to realize she wasn't just a helpful witness anymore. She was becoming the prime suspect. When Melissa Huckabee returned to the police station the next morning, she walked in with the same calm composure she had shown the day before. She smiled politely. She made small talk. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. Detectives began the second interview casually. They asked about her background, her education, her interest in criminal justice. Melissa told them she had studied criminology for 2 years after high school. She once considered becoming a patrol officer, maybe even working in forensics. It was an unusual detail, not incriminating on its own but interesting. She understood investigations. She knew about evidence, fingerprints, timelines, media releases. She wasn't naive. After nearly 20 minutes of light conversation, the detective gently shifted the focus. Let's talk about the note. Melissa described finding it again, the dirt on the paper, the word Cantor written at the top. She said she noticed the word suitcase misspelled. She claimed she panicked and immediately ran to an officer. She emphasized how upset she was, how she could barely breathe, how she was crying hysterically. But the detective wasn't listening to her emotion. He was listening to the details. How was the paper laying? He asked. Face up, she said. And you just happened to see it? Yes. He paused. It was strange that no one else had noticed it. The vigil had been crowded. Officers had been everywhere. Yet Melissa was the only person who found a note that described exactly how Sandra had been disposed of, in a suitcase in water at a specific location. The detective leaned forward. Did it trip you out? He asked carefully, that the note mentioned a stolen suitcase, and your suitcase had been stolen? Melissa nodded. Yeah, that was trippy. She agreed it was bizarre. She even called it ironic. But irony doesn't solve murder cases. Evidence does. Detectives had already searched Melissa's trailer. Inside they found something small, something easy to overlook. A spiral notebook. Several pages had been torn out. Individually that meant nothing. But investigators decided to compare the paper from the note Melissa found to the notebook inside her home. The size matched. The thickness matched. The torn edge pattern matched. Then they discovered something more disturbing. On one of the pages remaining in the notebook, faint indentations were visible. Impressions left behind from someone pressing hard while writing on the page above it. Forensic examiners enhanced the indentations. They could see letters. One letter in particular stood out, an N. When they overlaid the vigil note over the notebook page, the indentation lined up perfectly with the N in the word thrown written on the note. Same placement. Same pressure pattern. Same paper. It wasn't just similar. It was exact. Back in the interview room, the detective placed the notebook on the table. Melissa, he said calmly, we measured your spiral notebook. 7 inches top to bottom. He slid the vigil note next to it. Same size. She blinked. He continued. We noticed an indentation on one of the pages in your notebook. An N. When we laid this note over it, the indentation lined up exactly with the N on the note. Silence filled the room. Melissa stared at him. You've got to be joking, she said. I'm not joking, he replied. She quickly adjusted. Well, I gave Sandra and Miranda notebooks like that before. I'm not the only one who has one. It was a quick deflection. A reasonable attempt. But detectives weren't finished. They had found something else, a sticky note inside Melissa's car. Written on it were 2 cross streets. The same cross streets mentioned in the vigil note. The same cross streets near the irrigation canal where Sandra's body had been discovered. When confronted with the sticky note, Melissa shifted again. I wrote that down after I found the note, she said. You didn't mention that yesterday, the detective pointed out. She swallowed. I didn't want it to look incriminating. Now the composure was cracking. Melissa claimed she had looked up the street names on her computer after reading the vigil note. She said she drove to the area herself, hoping to find Sandra alive. She said she never saw water. Never saw anything suspicious. But the detective watched her body language change. Her shoulders tightened. Her arms crossed. Her breathing shifted. The friendly conversation tone was gone. Help me understand something, he said quietly. Why are you the only person who found this note? I don't know. Why does it mention a stolen suitcase, your suitcase? I don't know. Why does the paper match your notebook? I didn't write it. The answers were getting shorter. Less confident. The detective decided to press harder. We found something else, he said. An autopsy had been performed. Sandra had been drugged. A sedative, one that required a prescription. Melissa had a prescription for Xanax. 2 milligrams. Hypothetically, he asked, what would that dose do to a child? It would knock them out, she answered softly. Dangerous. Very. Detectives also found something at the church, a rolling pin with Sandra's DNA on it. And the autopsy revealed something even more disturbing. Sandra had been sexually assaulted. When told this, Melissa recoiled. That's sick, she said. But earlier in the interview, before the autopsy details were revealed publicly, Melissa had already speculated about assault, as if she knew. The detective leaned back. Melissa, he said, people don't just disappear. Sandra left that park with someone she trusted. The room felt smaller. You told me she wouldn't leave the park with strangers, he continued. Her mom said she'd leave with you. Melissa didn't respond. He wasn't accusing her directly yet, but he was circling her. And she knew it. Finally he said it plainly. I think you know where that note came from. Her jaw tightened. I don't. He held her gaze. I think you wrote it. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything said before. For nearly 2 weeks, Melissa had positioned herself as a grieving neighbor, a helpful witness, a victim of theft. Now the narrative was collapsing. And for the first time, the Sunday school teacher realized something terrifying. The detectives weren't looking for her help anymore. They were building a case against her. And they were almost ready to make their move. The moment Melissa said, I think I want a lawyer, the room shifted. Up until then, the interrogation had been a psychological chess match. Pressure applied slowly, strategically. But now the pieces were locked into place. The detective didn't argue. He simply stood up. Let me see your purse. Melissa hesitated for half a second, just enough to show she understood what was happening. Then she stood. Are you arresting me? She asked. Yes. Her hands were placed behind her back. The handcuffs clicked shut. You're under arrest for murder and kidnapping. What? She gasped. I didn't do anything. But the evidence said otherwise. Melissa was escorted into a holding cell. For a few minutes, everything went quiet. Then she asked to speak to the detective again. That decision would change everything. When she sat back down in the interview room, her composure was gone. The confident tone, the careful answers, the polite smile, all stripped away. I want you to prove to me that I did it, she said shakily. Because I didn't. The detective didn't respond immediately. He waited. And then something unexpected happened. It was an accident, Melissa whispered. The detective leaned forward slightly. An accident? She just died, Melissa said, her voice cracking. Accidents happen. The story that followed was chaotic, inconsistent. But it was the first time Melissa admitted she had been alone with Sandra. According to Melissa, she had seen Sandra walking outside the trailer park. She said Sandra approached her car. Inside the back seat was the suitcase. Melissa claimed Sandra liked to play hide and seek. She got inside, Melissa said. She told me to zip it up so she could scare the girls. The detective stared at her. You're saying an 8-year-old climbed inside a suitcase and zipped herself up? She told me to zip it, Melissa insisted. She said she went back inside her trailer to look for her keys and cell phone. She claimed she forgot Sandra was in the suitcase. Forgot. 15 minutes later, she drove to church. It wasn't until she arrived, she said, that she realized the suitcase felt heavy. She opened it. Sandra wasn't breathing. She looked pale, Melissa said softly. The detective didn't interrupt. Why didn't you call 911? He finally asked. I panicked. Panic. It was the word she kept using. But panic doesn't explain what happened next. Instead of calling for help, Melissa drove away with Sandra still inside the suitcase. Instead of reporting an accident, she hid the body. Instead of telling the truth, she staged a crime scene. The detective's voice hardened. Sandra didn't zip herself into that suitcase. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. She did. No, she didn't. Silence. Then, another crack in the story. She was drugged, the detective said. Melissa shook her head. I didn't give her anything. But toxicology reports showed sedatives in Sandra's system, the same medication Melissa was prescribed. Under pressure, Melissa changed her story again. She admitted to crushing pills into a cup of water. She claimed she took a sip and spit it out because it tasted bad. It landed on her, she said. Where? The detective asked. Inside the suitcase, by her feet. It was implausible. A desperate attempt to explain forensic evidence. But there was more. The autopsy had confirmed sexual assault. When confronted with this, Melissa initially denied it. Then she pivoted. It wasn't a man, she said. I did it. The detective paused. It was a chilling moment, not because of how she said it but because of how calmly she adjusted once confronted with proof. Investigators had also found something on her computer. An article saved about a child killed, placed inside a suitcase and dumped in water. The similarities were disturbing. Melissa denied researching it. Denied planning anything. She stuck to her new narrative. It was an accident. She panicked. She covered it up. But the detective wasn't convinced. Did you expect to get caught? He asked. I was going to turn myself in, she replied. When? When they said they were close to making an arrest. The pattern was clear now. Melissa had inserted herself into the investigation from the beginning. She reported her suitcase stolen. She attended the vigil. She found a note that guided police toward the body. She acted shocked, devastated, helpful. But every move tightened the net around her. The detective tried one final tactic. What if I told you someone saw Sandra in your car on video? Melissa looked up immediately. That's not true. Where was she when you drove away? In the suitcase. There it was. An admission that Sandra had been alive, or at least present, when Melissa left the trailer park. The accident narrative unraveled further with each answer. Sandra hadn't climbed into that suitcase alone. She hadn't drugged herself. She hadn't staged her own disposal. This wasn't panic. This was concealment. And the evidence pointed to something deliberate. By the end of the interrogation, Melissa's energy was drained. How do you feel now? The detective asked. Worse, she whispered. She wasn't wrong. The charges were severe: kidnapping, first-degree murder, and assault. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the notebook, the sticky note, the toxicology report, the confession, Melissa made a decision. She accepted a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to kidnapping and first-degree murder, prosecutors dropped the assault charge and removed the death penalty from consideration. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No trial. No dramatic courtroom battle. Just a quiet, final judgment. As for why she did it, the true motive remains debated. Some believe she craved attention. That she inserted herself into tragedies to feel important. Others think jealousy played a role. Sandra was loved, admired, the center of warmth in a tight-knit community. Or perhaps the motive was darker, more complicated, something buried deep within Melissa herself. Only she truly knows. What remains undeniable is this. An 8-year-old girl trusted someone she thought was safe. And that trust cost her everything. The trailer park in Tracy never felt the same again. Where children once ran freely, parents now watched more closely. Where neighbors once felt secure, doubt lingered. And every time someone sees a black suitcase abandoned near water, the memory resurfaces. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters don't hide in shadows. They stand beside you at candlelight vigils.